For our first story, we take you to rural Iowa, October 12, 2005. In the heartland of America, where cornfields stretch endlessly, three childhood friends set out to explore the countryside. But what they found was something they were never meant to see. They had grown up together in a small town in Iowa, their lives intertwined since kindergarten. The trio was inseparable, always seeking adventure in the mundane landscapes of their rural upbringing. That October, the air was crisp and the leaves had turned shades of amber and crimson. The local farmers had recently harvested their crops, leaving behind vast empty cornfields that seemed to beckon the curious. Mark, ever the thrill-seeker, proposed they explore one such field rumored to be haunted. The legend spoke of a farmer's family who had vanished without a trace decades ago, their spirits said to wander the fields at night. Jason was skeptical, dismissing the tales as mere folklore, while Lisa, though apprehensive, agreed to join, not wanting to be left out. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, they parked Mark's old pickup truck by the edge of the field. Armed with only flashlights and their youthful bravado, they ventured into the labyrinth of cornstalks. The towering plants rustled in the evening breeze, creating an eerie symphony that set their nerves on edge. They walked deeper into the field, laughing and teasing each other to mask their growing unease. After about an hour, they stumbled upon a clearing. In its center stood a dilapidated scarecrow, its straw-stuffed body slumped and weathered by time. Its burlap sack head hung low and its button eyes seemed to follow them. Mark, trying to lighten the mood, dared Jason to touch it. Jason scoffed but accepted the challenge, approaching the scarecrow with exaggerated caution. As he reached out, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the scarecrow to sway and a low, haunting whistle to echo through the field. Startled, Jason jumped back and the trio burst into nervous laughter. They decided to rest for a moment, sitting in the clearing and sharing stories. The sun had fully set by now and the moon cast a pale glow over the field. The temperature dropped and a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring their surroundings. Lisa shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. Suddenly they heard it, a faint, melodic humming, like a lullaby carried by the wind. It was distant at first, but grew louder, seeming to come from all directions. They exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado evaporating. Mark stood up, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but the fog distorted everything. Without warning, the humming ceased, plunging the clearing into an oppressive silence. The air felt heavy, and an overwhelming sense of being watched settled over them. Lisa's flashlight flickered, and in its intermittent glow, she thought she saw shadows moving among the cornstalks. Panic set in. They decided to head back to the truck, but as they turned, they realized they had lost their bearings. The fog had transformed the field into an endless maze, and every direction looked the same. Their footsteps quickened, the cornstalks scratching against them like skeletal fingers. Mark tried to keep them calm, insisting they would find the way out, but his voice wavered. Then the whispers began, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. Lisa clutched Jason's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their minds with an inexplicable terror. In their frantic state, they stumbled upon another clearing, but this one was different. In its center stood an old, weathered farmhouse, its windows dark and its door hanging ajar. The structure seemed out of place, as if it had materialized from thin air. Desperation overriding caution, they approached the house, hoping to find someone to guide them back. The floorboards creaked under their weight as they stepped inside. The air was stale, carrying the scent of decay. Their flashlights revealed faded wallpaper peeling from the walls and furniture draped in white sheets, untouched for years. As they ventured further, they found a staircase leading to the second floor. Mark led the way, each step groaning in protest. At the top they discovered a long hallway with several doors on either side. The whispers returned, louder now, emanating from behind the doors. Summoning their courage, they opened the first door on the left. Inside was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Toys lay scattered on the floor and a small bed was neatly made. On the wall hung a portrait of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. The same family that had vanished all those years ago. A chill ran down their spines as they realized the implications. They backed out of the room, closing the door behind them. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by faint footsteps echoing through the house. Fear gripped them, and they decided to leave the house and find their way back to the truck, preferring the uncertainty of the cornfield to the malevolent presence within the farmhouse. As they descended the stairs, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The temperature plummeted, and their breaths formed visible puffs in the frigid air. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and stretch toward them. They rushed to the door, pulling it open with all their strength, and fled into the night. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the faint outline of the road in the distance. Relief washed over them as they hurried toward it, the whispers fading with each step. They reached the truck, breathless and shaken, and sped away without looking back. In the days that followed, they spoke little of the incident, each haunted by the memories of that night. They couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them from the field, a lingering presence that watched from the shadows. Years later, Mark returned to the area, driven by a need to understand what had happened. But when he arrived, he found nothing but an empty field. The farmhouse was gone, leaving no trace it had ever existed. The legend of the vanished family remained, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurk in the heart of the cornfields. For our second story, we take you to Lincolnshire, England, August 15th, 2003. In the quiet rural flatlands surrounded by endless cornfields, something chilling unfolded. An incident that still haunts those who lived to remember it. The story comes from a first-hand account shared on the website Your Ghost Stories, where individuals recount their paranormal experiences. A young man, whom we'll call Tom, was visiting his grandparents' farmhouse during the summer holidays. The farmhouse was surrounded by extensive cornfields, creating a natural playground for a curious teenager. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape, Tom decided to take a walk through the cornfield. The golden hues of the corn, combined with the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze, created a serene atmosphere. As he ventured deeper into the field, the tall stalks began to obscure his view of the farmhouse, isolating him from the outside world. The path he followed was narrow, and the dense corn seemed to close in around him. After walking for about 20 minutes, he reached a small clearing, a spot where the corn hadn't grown as densely. It was here that he first felt an unsettling sensation, as if he were being watched. Dismissing it as paranoia, Tom sat down to enjoy the tranquility. But the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. The rustling of the corn seemed to grow louder, more erratic, as if something were moving through it. He stood up, scanning the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The sun had now fully set, and the dim light made it difficult to see beyond a few feet. Deciding it was best to head back, Tom retraced his steps. The path, which had seemed straightforward earlier, now felt labyrinthine. Every rustle, every whisper of the wind heightened his anxiety. Halfway through his return journey, he heard it, a distinct low whisper calling his name. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was familiar, yet distorted, as if spoken through clenched teeth. Mustering his courage, Tom called out, asking if someone was there. The only response was the rustling of the corn. He quickened his pace, the narrow path seeming to stretch endlessly before him. The whispers grew more frequent, more insistent. Always just behind him, he resisted the urge to look back, focusing solely on reaching the farmhouse. Finally, the edge of the cornfield came into view, and he burst out into the open, gasping for breath. The farmhouse lights were a welcome sight, and he hurried inside, locking the door behind him. His grandparents, noticing his distressed state, asked what had happened. Tom recounted his experience, expecting them to dismiss it. Instead, they exchanged worried glances. His grandfather sighed, explaining that there had been tales about the cornfield for generations, stories of a shadowy figure that lured people into the depths of the corn, especially at dusk. Some said it was the spirit of a farmer who had lost his life in the fields. Others believed it to be something far older, a guardian of the land angered by trespassers. That night, as Tom lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The events of the evening replayed in his mind, and sleep eluded him. In the early hours of the morning, just as he was about to drift off, he heard it again, a whisper, soft and menacing, calling his name from outside the window. He stayed awake until dawn, the whispers continuing intermittently, fading away with the first light of day. The following day, Tom's grandparents performed a cleansing ritual, an old tradition meant to appease restless spirits. They advised him to avoid the cornfield at dusk and never to respond to the whispers. Tom heeded their warning, spending the rest of his visit close to the farmhouse. Years later, Tom would look back on that summer with a shiver. He never returned to his grandparents' farmhouse, and the whispers remained a mystery. Whether it was a figment of his imagination or something more sinister, he couldn't say, but the memory of the shadow in the cornfield stayed with him, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in the familiar. For our last story, we take you to rural Nebraska. September 18th, 2010. Beneath the endless sky, surrounded by vast cornfields, something chilling took place, an event that remains unexplained to this day. The story comes from a first-hand account shared on a paranormal forum, where individuals recount their unexplained experiences. A young man named David, along with his friends Mike and Sarah, decided to explore an abandoned farmhouse rumored to be haunted. The farmhouse was nestled deep within a sprawling cornfield, accessible only by a narrow dirt path. Locals whispered tales of strange occurrences and missing persons associated with the property, but the trio dismissed these as mere superstitions. On the evening of September 18th, 2010, they set out just before sunset, eager for an adventure. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the cornfield, creating an eerie atmosphere. As they walked, the rustling of the corn stalks in the gentle breeze seemed to whisper secrets. Upon reaching the farmhouse, they found it in a state of decay. Windows were shattered, the door hung loosely on its hinges, and the once vibrant paint had peeled away, revealing the weathered wood beneath. Undeterred, they ventured inside, flashlights in hand. The interior was just as dilapidated. Furniture lay overturned, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. As they explored, they found old photographs scattered on the floor depicting a family from decades past. A sense of unease began to settle over them, but they pressed on, attributing it to the natural creepiness of the setting. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, they discovered a diary belonging to a young girl named Emily. The last entry was dated September 18th, 1950, exactly 60 years prior. The entry spoke of strange noises coming from the cornfield and a feeling of being watched. The coincidence unnerved them, but they laughed it off as a prank or fabrication. As night fell, they decided to leave. However, upon exiting the farmhouse, they realized the path they had taken was no longer visible. The cornfield seemed to have shifted, creating a maze-like expanse with no clear direction. Panic set in as they tried to find their way back, but every turn led them deeper into the field. The rustling of the corn grew louder, and they began to hear faint whispers, as if the field itself was alive. Their flashlights flickered, casting erratic beams of light that only heightened their fear. In their frantic state, they became separated. David called out for his friends, but only the whispers responded. Hours seemed to pass as he stumbled through the cornfield, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Just as despair began to overtake him, he broke through the edge of the field, collapsing onto the dirt road. He looked back, but the cornfield was silent, the whispers gone. David contacted the authorities, and a search was conducted for Mike and Sarah. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of them was ever found. The cornfield remained silent, holding its secrets close. To this day, their disappearance remains a mystery, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking within the familiar. Some places are meant to be left alone. A farmhouse that vanishes with its history, a shadow watching from the stalks, a field that swallows those who dare enter. These aren't just stories, they happened. And if they happened to them, maybe the next time you hear whispers in the wind or see something move between the rows of corn, you won't be so quick to step inside. Some things don't want to be found. If you enjoyed these terrifying true stories, like, share and subscribe to The Sixth Frequency. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the scariest things aren't in the dark. They're waiting for you just beyond the field.